You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Walker. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about riddles and puzzles and how they can make the game much more interesting. So, first of all, we want to understand the difference between a riddle and a puzzle. Oftentimes the terms are used interchangeably, but there are some differences. Most notably, it's important to remember that all riddles are puzzles, but not all puzzles are riddles. Both have generally the same purpose, which is to challenge people and test their brain or reasoning abilities. And puzzles and riddles both help in the acquisition of new knowledge and the development of logical thinking. So a puzzle is a problem or tangible object whose purpose is to test the knowledge or ingenuity of individuals, and puzzles can be solved often by logical reasoning. A riddle, on the other hand, is a puzzle, but it is in the form of a statement, a question, or a phrase whose purpose is to make you think. It often has only one correct answer, which that the person must guess or deduce from the information that is offered. So the primary thing to note here is that riddles are verbal or language-based, but you would not be incorrect if you labeled all of these things in your dungeon as puzzles. Puzzles are unique in that they are considered in psychology to be whole brain activities. This means that they challenge both the logic centers and the creative centers of our brains. So we're activating both left and right hemispheres of our brain when we're working to solve a puzzle. There are some studies that have even suggested that engaging in puzzles can improve our short-term memory and boost our IQ. The first thing that a dungeon master should do before bringing puzzles into their games is discuss with their players whether or not they like puzzles in the games that they're playing in. This should be a part of your session 0 or an introductory session before you actually start your game. Role-playing games are collaborative, and everybody should be on the same page, or most everybody should be on the same page. It will better the overall experience. You might find that as you ask about puzzles that some characters or players say that they don't enjoy them. Now, this could be, from my experience, that their games didn't have great execution of puzzles. I think it has less to do with the enjoyment of puzzles overall and whether or not the puzzles worked in the games that they were playing in. Some puzzles I've seen even presented in like D&D modules or Pathfinder adventures, they just don't have clear answers or they're too difficult to solve. And when that happens, I think they can become overwhelming, especially if it's something that you have to solve in order to progress the story. So if you came across a puzzle that you can't get through a door and there's no clues and you're supposed to somehow deduce from all these archaic symbols what this is, it ends up oftentimes just being that the dungeon master gets upset when the players haven't figured it out, or the players get upset and they're like, this is pointless. So he requires an intelligence check or a wisdom check or something else, knowledge arcana, and then might just hand wave the puzzle altogether and say, okay, well, you figure out that this piece goes here, or the correct order of buttons that you have to press is so-and-so. And it just doesn't work out as an enjoyable experience when that happens. If you have a puzzle in your game, you want the players to be able to solve it themselves because it gives them a sense of accomplishment. Role-playing games are perfectly suited for puzzles because role-playing games in and of themselves are whole brain activities. Our logic centers are activated by the rule sets, and math is used all the time. And then our creative centers are constantly activated by the use of our imagination and roleplay. In my opinion, this is why those who are frequent role players generally score better on standardized tests of both intelligence and emotional quotients. So when we game, we're constantly practicing math, we're practicing social peer interactions, and we're role-playing difficult interpersonal interactions. And these are all the same centers that are activated by puzzles. So I think players who say that they don't like them just haven't had a good experience with them. So one of the most important things to remember when you're designing or incorporating a puzzle for your game is it needs to be easy enough that your players are able to solve it before they lose interest in the puzzle. But it also needs to be challenging enough that they actually need to stop and think about the solution and activate those whole brain centers. Aside from making them think, it's beneficial if you can correlate your puzzles to the story, or at the very least, to a fantasy world setting, meaning your puzzles and riddles should have answers that fit within the fantasy world you're playing in. You don't most likely want to have the answer to your riddle be something like a computer, unless you're playing in a world where computers exist. It would be much better for the answer to be based on a spell or something like that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at our tricks of the trade. Get out your pencil and paper. Okay, this is Tricks of the Trade, where I give you at least 3 ideas each week that can be used to enhance your campaign. I try and keep these ideas connected to the main topic. So today I have some fun puzzles for you to borrow and add to your dungeons. So puzzle number 1. It's a simple looking room with a locked door and a key on a pedestal. Whenever the characters pick up the key and try and insert it into the lock, it crumbles to dust the instant it touches the keyhole. The key then reforms on the pedestal. The trick is for your party to get the key into the lock without physically touching it. So, to solve this, somewhere in your dungeon ahead of time, you can hide a scroll of Mage Hand and have the players have that on hand, so that would be the solution to that. Also, if they have this, they also might have the spell themselves, or telekinesis, or some other method. Perhaps they have a ghostly companion that can move the key for them. Whatever it is, the trick is just they have to get it from the pedestal into the key without any physical touch. Puzzle number 2, the Queen's Summons. This is one of my favorite puzzles from a game that I ran and involved putting life-sized chessboard pieces in a central room of a dungeon. On the board was a black queen and 5 white pieces. The queen was the only piece on the chessboard that could be moved around, and each white piece was correlated to a different portcullis-style door in the dungeon, and it would only raise when the queen was threatening the piece correlated with that door. The trick of this puzzle is that every time the queen is moved to a new position, a monster is summoned into the central chamber and the party must fight it. And each time a monster is summoned into the chamber, it becomes more powerful. So the party needs to figure out the proper pattern to move the queen in the fewest number of moves as possible to open all of the doors. So as you can see, this isn't a hard puzzle to solve. In fact, there's countless ways that it could be solved because you can just keep moving the queen around. So it doesn't stop the party from proceeding and bog them down without an answer to the puzzle. It does make their lack of figuring out a proper pattern more difficult as time goes on, but it still lets them move the story even without a specific single answer. So my third puzzle idea for you is dancing statues. This one's a little more fun and quirky. In this puzzle, the party passes a series of statues that line both sides of a long chamber in a zigzag pattern. Each statue is of the same individual in a different dance pose, and at the end of the room is a door with an elaborate eye carved and painted into it. The eye will radiate a divination magic if any spells are cast to detect on it, and the only way to open the door is for a party member to perform the dance that is depicted by the statue poses. So for this one, I have a couple of bonuses. The first bonus would be the door is so small that it would only allow one person to pass through it at a time, and each time it closes, the statues move and show a different dance that must be performed. So each party character would have to do a different dance before they can pass through this door. And a double bonus for this would be if you can make your players show off their dance moves in person before they move on. So the next puzzle I have is a riddle puzzle. So each door in a dungeon in this one has a statue next to it with open palms as though it's ready to be handed something. When the doors are attempted to be opened, they're all locked, but the attempt triggers a verbal illusion on the statue where it speaks a riddle. The answer to each riddle must always be an object of some sort that can be placed in the waiting hands of the statue, and then the door will open if the right answer is placed there. And each statue will tell a different riddle for a different object. So a bonus on this one is if all of the objects are things that have to be found in a different segment of the dungeon to move on. And another bonus might be is if each gift cripples your players in some way for their final fight. Like they have to give away weapons or armor, or perhaps they have to let their own blood onto the statue and they might suffer some con damage or con drain. Things like that. So thank you so much. This brings us to the end of the episode. Check out my book. It's called Session Zero, the DMG to Writing Great Campaigns in Any System, and it is available on Amazon. Also, feel free to send me an email if you have any suggestions, comments, or ideas for future shows. The email address is all one word. It's dungeonsdragonspsychology@gmail.com. We will see you next week, where we're going to be talking with my longtime friend and my original gaming buddy, Dustin Archer, about backwards campaign building. Thank you so much for listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology podcast. See you next session.